daughter-in-law called me a freeloader, so I canceled their 100K wedding, then heard screams outside. The microphone felt cold in my hand, a stark contrast to the boiling rage in my chest. Just moments before, I had heard my future daughter-in-law, the radiant bride in a dress worth more than most people's homes, call me a freeloader. Now, in front of 300 of Charleston's elite, I was about to cancel her $100,000 wedding. And that was just the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The grand ballroom of the Kiowa Island Resort was a masterpiece of southern opulence. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables adorned with white roses and magnolia blossoms, their sweet, heavy scent mixing with the salty air drifting in from the Atlantic. The murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses created a symphony of wealth and privilege. To any observer, it was the perfect wedding, the union of two of Charleston's promising new generation, my son, Ethan, and his beautiful fiancée, Sophia. I sat at the head table, a silent queen in a kingdom I no longer recognized. I watched Sophia glide through the room, her smile as bright and flawless as the diamond on her finger. She was talking to a small group of investors, men in tailored suits whose eyes followed her with a mixture of admiration and calculation. Beside her stood Marcus Thorne, a man introduced to me as her uncle. He had a politician's handshake, but the eyes of a shark, cold, ancient, and always hungry. My son Ethan stood slightly behind them, his posture stiff, a fixed smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He looked less like a groom and more like a hostage. My gaze lingered on them. Something had felt wrong for weeks, a subtle dissonance beneath the surface of wedding plans and joyful pronouncements. It was in the way Ethan avoided my eyes, the way Sophia's talk of love was always interwoven with talk of business opportunities and strengthening partnerships. Then it happened. One of the investors, a man with a booming voice named Mr. Abernathy, gestured discreetly towards me. "And your mother-in-law, Sophia? Is she an investor in Charleston Horizons as well?" he asked, stunned. Sophia let out a delicate laugh, a sound like tiny bells. She leaned in, conspiratorially, but her voice was a stage whisper, perfectly pitched to carry across the short distance to my table. "Her?" she said, the single word dripping with condescension. "Oh, she's just a freeloader, living off the family inheritance. Mom is just here for show. The real legal guarantor for our project is Ethan." The symphony of the ballroom went silent. The scent of magnolias turned sickly sweet. Freeloader. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. 68 years of my life, of building a legacy with my late husband, of raising a son, of managing our finances with a strategist's mind, all of it erased by a single, venomous word. I looked at Ethan, hoping for a flicker of protest, a defense of his mother. Nothing. He just stared into his champagne glass as if it held the answers to the universe. In that moment, the weeks of vague unease solidified into icy certainty. This wasn't a wedding. It was a business transaction, and I was being written off as a worthless asset. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They mistook my silence for weakness. They mistook my age for irrelevance. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My rage did not erupt. It cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a weapon. I stood up, my movements deliberate and smooth. Every eye in the room turned to me as I walked to the small stage where the band was taking a break. I picked up the microphone. The feedback's soft squeal was the only sound in the cavernous hall. I looked directly at Sophia. Her perfect smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. I looked at Marcus Thorne, whose gaze narrowed with sudden, predatory focus. Finally, I looked at my son, whose face had gone pale. Before the bride and groom make their speeches, I began, my voice calm, clear, and carrying to every corner of the room. I have an important announcement to make. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build until it was a palpable thing. The Hale family's investment of $100,000 into this project. I let the words hang in the air, then delivered the final fatal blow. Is officially canceled. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Sophia's face was a mask of pure horror, her skin as white as her dress. Marcus Thorne took a half step forward, a snarl twisting his lips. But before anyone could speak, a woman's terrified scream ripped through the air from the back of the ballroom. It was a signal. Chaos erupted as a few guests began to shout and push, creating a diversion. And then, a new sound cut through the manufactured panic, real and terrifyingly close. The piercing, unmistakable wail of police sirens converging on us from all directions. The trap was sprung. A week before the wedding, before the public detonation, the first cracks appeared, not in the foundation of our family home, but on the delicate surface of a porcelain teacup. My study has always been my sanctuary. It's a room paneled in dark, rich mahogany, smelling of old books and beeswax, overlooking a garden where Spanish moss hangs from the ancient oaks like silver lace. It's where my husband, Richard, and I planned our lives, our finances, our son's future. It was a room built on logic, trust, and quiet strength. That afternoon, it felt like a stage for a poorly conceived play. Ethan and Sophia sat opposite me, perched on the edges of the leather armchairs that Richard had loved. A silver tea service sat between us on the mahogany coffee table, but it went untouched. My cup of Earl Grey grew cold, its fragrant steam long since vanished into the still, humid air. "We're so glad we could finally pin you down, Victoria," Sophia began, her voice smooth as honey. She slid a thin, glossy brochure across the table. On the cover, an artist's rendering of a sleek, modern condominium complex gleamed against a perfect Charleston sunset. The name was printed in elegant gold script, Charleston Horizons. "We wanted to officially present you with the opportunity to become a foundational partner," she continued, her smile never wavering. "This isn't just about the wedding. It's about building our future together." I picked up the brochure. The paper was heavy, expensive. The language inside was a waterfall of corporate buzzwords: synergistic growth, unparalleled coastal luxury, exclusive investment tranche. It felt alien in this room of cherished memories. My son, looking pale and drawn, cleared his throat. "Mom, this is my future, our future." He gestured toward the brochure as if it were a sacred text. "Your $100,000 would be the most important seed funding we could get. It's not just about the money. It's about showing our partners that we have the full backing of the Hale family. It's a vote of confidence." The words came out perfectly, but they were hollow. They weren't his. Ethan was a lawyer, precise and methodical. He didn't speak in pitches. He didn't use terms like seed funding when asking his mother for help. He was putting on a dog and pony show, and the strain of the performance was visible in the tight set of his jaw. I placed the brochure back on the table, my fingertips resting on the glossy image. My mind, the mind of a financial strategist who had navigated corporate mergers and hostile takeovers, was screaming. Red flags were going up everywhere. You don't call your family partners. You don't call a contribution to your future seed funding, not unless you're trying to sell them something they shouldn't be buying. "It looks ambitious," I said, choosing my words carefully. I looked at Ethan, trying to catch his eye, to find my son behind the nervous facade. Tell me about the legal structure, Ethan. Who are the primary stakeholders? He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. It's all in the prospectus, Mom. Standard LLC. Very straightforward. He gestured vaguely toward a thin file Sophia had placed next to the brochure. He was deflecting, pushing paper at me instead of giving me a straight answer. Sophia jumped in smoothly, covering his hesitation. Marcus, my uncle, has handled all the corporate architecture. He's a genius with this sort of thing. Your investment would be completely secure, with a projected return of 20% in the first year alone. 20%. In real estate. In this market. An impossible number. A promise made to dazzle the unsophisticated. It was a carnival barker's promise, not a serious financial projection. Something smelled distinctly fishy. I let the silence hang in the room, thick and uncomfortable. I didn't need to read the fine print. I needed to read my son. He wouldn't meet my gaze, focusing instead on a loose thread on the arm of his chair. He was trapped, and whatever was trapping him was sitting right next to him, smiling her brilliant, predatory smile. I'll need some time to review these documents, I said finally, my voice even. This is a significant amount of money. Of course, Sophia said, though a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Just know that the initial investment window closes the day of the wedding. We're hoping to make a grand announcement at the reception. It would be so meaningful to have you be a part of that. It was an ultimatum wrapped in a pretty bow, a threat disguised as an invitation. They left soon after, leaving the glossy brochure and the untouched tea behind. I stood at the window of my study, watching their new BMW crunch over the gravel driveway and disappear down the lane. The room felt cold, violated. They hadn't come for my blessing or my support. They had come for my signature on a check. They had come to pitch the matriarch, and in doing so, had treated me not as a mother, but as the first mark. The cracks on the teacup were invisible, but I could feel them spreading, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had to find out what lay beneath. Sleep wouldn't come. I lay in my 4-poster bed, the same bed I had shared with Richard for 40 years, and listened to the night sounds of the old house, the groan of the timbers settling, the whisper of the humid night air through the screens, and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall below. It was a clock that had marked the hours of my life, the peaceful, the joyful, the grief-stricken. Tonight, its steady rhythm felt like a countdown to a disaster I couldn't yet name. The conversation from that afternoon played on a loop in my mind. Ethan's stilted performance, Sophia's saccharine poison, the impossible 20% return. It was a house of cards, and I was being asked to admire the architecture just before the whole thing came tumbling down. Giving up on sleep, I slipped out of bed, pulling on a silk robe. The wooden floors were cool beneath my feet as I made my way downstairs, my only intention to get a glass of cold water. The house was dark, steeped in shadows and moonlight that filtered through the tall, mullioned windows. As I reached the bottom of the grand staircase, I froze. A sliver of light escaped from beneath the door of the drawing room, a room Sophia had claimed as her de facto office for wedding planning, and I could hear a voice, her voice, but stripped of its usual honeyed warmth. This was a different Sophia, one I had never heard before. Her voice was low, sharp, and laced with a cold fury. I crept closer, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. The old adage says that the walls have ears, but that night, I was the ears. I pressed myself into the shadows of the hallway, just beside the heavy oak door. "I don't care what you have to do. You make it happen," she hissed into the phone. There was a pause. "No, you listen to me. I'm the one with my neck on the line here. I got him to do it." My blood ran cold. Him? She had to be talking about Ethan. Everything is ready, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, thick with menace. Ethan has completed the entire legal framework for Charleston Horizons. The paperwork is clean, ironclad. He's good. I'll give him that. The wedding is the final net. We have 300 of the wealthiest people in the Low Country walking into our parlor, ready to be charmed. We will walk out of there with commitments for at least $10 million. My breath caught in my throat. This was so much bigger than my $100,000. This was a full-blown con, and my son was the architect of its legitimacy. Just make sure your people are ready, Sophia snapped. And you'd better be there. I don't trust you as far as I can throw you, Marcus. Marcus, the uncle. The man with the shark's eyes. There was a longer pause. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of his voice on the other end. When Sophia spoke again, all the fury was gone, replaced by a raw, chilling fear. "Don't you dare threaten me," she whispered, and the sound was more terrifying than her anger. "You know what I have riding on this. You know who I owe. Don't mess this up, Marcus, because if you do, neither of us will make it out of this alive. Do you understand me?" I didn't wait to hear the end of the conversation. I backed away from the door, my movements as silent as a ghost's. My mind was reeling, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. This wasn't just about greed. It was about desperation. It was dangerous. My hand, trembling, went to the pocket of my robe. My phone. With fumbling fingers, I pulled it out. My first instinct was to call the police, to scream for help. But who would believe me? The word of an old woman against the city's new golden couple? No, I needed proof. I needed a weapon. I crept back toward the door, my fears solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. I swiped the screen of my phone, my thumb finding the voice memo app. I held the phone up, angling the base toward the sliver of light under the door. I took a steadying breath and pressed the button. A tiny red light blinked on, a single defiant spark in the overwhelming darkness of the hall. It felt like a declaration of war. The ticking of the grandfather clock no longer sounded like a countdown to disaster. It sounded like my own heart, steady and ready for the fight to come. The next morning, I drove not to my lawyer's office or the police station, but to a cluttered, book-filled apartment in a less fashionable part of Charleston. It was the home of Clara Bensley, and for the last 50 years, she had been my closest friend, my confidant, and my rock. While I had married into the quiet, structured world of old money, Clara had spent her life in the trenches as an investigative reporter, chasing down corrupt politicians and exposing corporate fraud. She was 70, sharp as a tack, and had a healthy disrespect for anyone who thought they could pull the wool over her eyes. If anyone could help me make sense of the nightmare I'd stumbled into, it was Clara. Her apartment was what she called organized chaos. Stacks of books threatened to avalanche from every surface. Old newspapers were piled in corners, and a massive corkboard on one wall was a spiderweb of maps, photos, and handwritten notes connected by colored string. The ghost of a long-solved investigation. The place smelled of strong coffee and newsprint. It was the war room of a retired general, and I had come to ask for one last campaign. She took one look at my face as she opened the door, and her usual wry smile vanished. "Victoria? What in God's name happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse, Clara," I said, stepping inside. "I think I've seen a monster." She led me to her small kitchen table, cleared a space by sweeping a stack of files onto a nearby chair, and poured me a mug of coffee so strong it could have stripped paint. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly as I wrapped them around the warm ceramic. "All right," she said, sitting opposite me, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Spill it from the beginning." I told her everything. The strange meeting in my study, the hollow words coming out of my son's mouth, the glossy brochure with its impossible promises. And then I took out my phone. "But this," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "this is what you really need to hear." I placed the phone on the table between us and pressed play. Sophia's voice filled the small kitchen, cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of the charm she wore like a cloak. The threats, the mention of Marcus, the chilling admission that Ethan had built the legal framework for their entire scheme. As the recording played, I watched Clara's face, her brow furrowed. The friendly concern in her eyes was replaced by the intense, analytical focus of the journalist she once was. She was no longer listening as a friend. She was listening for evidence, for weaknesses, for the truth hidden between the lines. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. Clara leaned back in her chair, letting out a long, slow breath. "Well, I'll be damned," she said softly. She looked at me, and her expression was grim. "Victoria, you were right to come to me. You need to understand what you're dealing with here. This isn't the voice of some run-of-the-mill loan shark. This is organized crime." The phrase hung in the air, more terrifying than I could have imagined. This wasn't just a greedy girl trying to swindle her mother-in-law. This was something far darker, with tentacles reaching into places I couldn't even fathom. The way she talks about Marcus, the fear in her voice when she says, "Neither of us will make it out of this alive." She's not the one pulling the strings, Victoria. She's a pawn, maybe even a victim herself, caught in something way over her head. Clara tapped a finger on the table. "And they've got their hooks so deep into Ethan that he's doing their dirty work for them." A wave of despair washed over me, but Clara's energy was infectious. The worried friend was gone, and in her place was the investigator. Her eyes gleamed with a familiar fire. "This isn't the time to fall apart," she said, her voice firm. "This is the time to fight back. They think you're a doddering old woman, a freeloader. It's time we showed them what this freeloader can do." The atmosphere in the room shifted. My fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else. Resolve. This was no longer just my kitchen table. It was a command center. The desk lamp cast a harsh light on Clara's face, highlighting the determined set of her jaw and the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She looked exactly as the outline described. A general planning her first move. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger now. "What do we do?" "First, we dig," Clara said, already rising from her chair and moving toward her computer. "You've given me the smoke. Now I'm going to find the fire. I still have some old contacts, a few cybersecurity wizards who owe me a favor or two. They can stay hidden in the weeds and dig into anything with a digital footprint. Give me the names. Marcus Thorne and Charleston Horizons." She scribbled them on a notepad. "I'll find out if they're real, who's behind them, and where the money is flowing. We're going to turn over every single rock until we find the snakes hiding underneath." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. 2 days later, I was back in Clara's apartment, pacing her worn Persian rug while she worked at her computer. The air was thick with tension and the smell of day-old coffee. For 48 hours, she had been a ghost, communicating only through a few cryptic texts. Getting warmer. Found a thread. The rabbit hole is deep. Now, she had summoned me. The hunt was over. "Sit down, Victoria," she said without turning from the screen. "You're going to want to be sitting for this." I took the chair beside her desk. Her screen was a dizzying maze of diagrams and flow charts, boxes connected by a web of lines that looked like a madman's genealogy chart. In the center was a box labeled Charleston Horizons, LLC. "Your instincts were dead on," Clara began, her voice tired, but edged with the grim satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Charleston Horizons is a ghost, a complete work of fiction. It exists only on paper, and even that paper is a lie. She pointed to the screen. It's a classic shell company. Think of it like a Russian nesting doll. Charleston Horizons is registered to a parent company called Low Country Holdings, which is owned by another entity called Atlantic Development Group, which in turn is a subsidiary of a Delaware corporation with a name so generic it's practically invisible. There are 5 layers of corporate camouflage between your son's project and any real human being. My financial background understood the structure, but my heart recoiled from the sheer, deliberate deception of it all. "And Marcus Thorne?" I asked. "His name isn't on a single document," Clara confirmed, tapping her keyboard. "He's too smart for that. He's a ghost in the machine." But my contact ran a deep digital forensic analysis. Thorne's digital fingerprints are all over this. He used encrypted servers and burner emails, but he got sloppy once or twice. He's the one pulling the strings, no doubt about it. He's built a fortress of lies to hide behind. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. This was more sophisticated, more sinister than I had imagined. So the whole thing is a scam. They take the investors' money and just disappear? "That's part of it," Clara said, her expression darkening. "But it's worse than that. That's not the real prize." She turned to face me, her eyes holding a deep and profound sorrow, as if she was about to deliver a physical blow. "Victoria, where did you and Richard build your beach house? The one on Sullivan's Island?" The question was so unexpected it threw me off balance. "You know where it is. On that quiet stretch just past the old lighthouse. Why?" Clara didn't answer. Instead, she clicked a few more times, and the corporate diagram was replaced by a familiar satellite map of the Charleston coastline. I could see the curve of Sullivan's Island, the marshlands, the glint of the sun on the water. It was a view I knew like the back of my hand. The brochure for Charleston Horizons was vague about the exact location, just mentioning prime coastal real estate, Clara said, her voice low. I dug into the City Planning Commission's database. I found the official project proposal they filed, and this is the proposed development zone. With a final click, a blood-red outline appeared on the map. It wasn't a vague shape. It was a precise, jagged perimeter. And it was a perimeter I recognized with a gut-wrenching, soul-crushing certainty. The red line didn't just include the area near my beach house. It completely, perfectly, and brutally encircled it. The air left my lungs. The house Richard and I had designed together. The place where we'd watched Ethan build sandcastles. The porch where we'd sat for 30 summers watching the tide roll in. It was all inside that red box. It wasn't just a target. It was the bullseye. They're not just after your money, Victoria, Clara said softly. They're after your land. They're after your home. They're after your memories. The shock was a physical thing, a wave of ice that washed over me, leaving me numb. But then, something else followed. A heat that started in my chest and spread through my veins, burning away the shock, the grief, the fear. It was rage, pure, cold, and absolute. Sophia's word echoed in my mind. Freeloader. It wasn't just a casual insult. It was a justification. In her mind, I was just an obstacle, an old woman squatting on a piece of land they wanted. This entire, elaborate deception, the seduction of my son, the sham of a wedding, it was all a means to an end. And the end was the erasure of my life with Richard. This was no longer a fight to save my son from a mistake. This was a war to defend my very soul. The image on the screen, That red line drawn around my happy place like a noose was burned into my mind. It was a declaration of war, and I would be damned if I was going to let them win. I didn't call ahead. I didn't make an appointment. The next afternoon, I walked into the downtown law firm of Hale, Sutton and Associates, the firm my son had built from the ground up. His office was on the top floor, a corner suite of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the Cooper River Bridge. It was the epitome of modern success. Cool, minimalist, and impersonal. It looked like a place where difficult emotions were not welcome. His assistant, a young woman with a perpetually worried expression, tried to stop me. "Mrs. Hale, he's in a meeting. I don't think—" "His meeting just ended," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument, and walked past her desk, pushing open the heavy glass door to his office. Ethan was on the phone, his back to me, looking out at the view. He was wearing a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. He turned as I entered, a flash of annoyance on his face that quickly morphed into alarm when he saw my expression. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he said, quickly ending his call. "Is everything okay?" I didn't answer. I walked to his expansive, polished desk, a surface so clean it looked like it had never been touched by human hands. From my leather portfolio, I took out 2 documents. I placed the first one in the center of the desk. Clara's intricate diagram of the shell companies, the web of deceit with Charleston Horizons at its heart. Then I placed the second document beside it, the satellite map with that brutal red line drawn around our home on Sullivan's Island. I said nothing. I just stood there, letting the evidence speak for itself. Ethan stared at the papers. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, ashen gray. His carefully constructed composure shattered like the glass walls around us. He sank into his expensive leather chair, his eyes wide with a dawning animal terror. He looked from the map to my face and back again. The armor was gone. All I saw was my little boy, caught in a lie too big to escape. "How?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "How did you find this?" "That doesn't matter, Ethan," I said, my voice quiet but as hard as steel. "What matters is that I know. I know it's all a lie. The shell companies, the fake project, the plan to take our home." I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. "What I don't know is why. Why would you do this? Why would you help them try to destroy your own family's legacy?" That's when he broke. The fight went out of him completely. He buried his face in his hands, and a dry, racking sob escaped his lips. It was a sound of such profound despair it nearly broke my heart, but I held my ground. I needed the truth, all of it. "I was trapped, Mom," he choked out, his words muffled by his hands. "I didn't have a choice." "There is always a choice, Ethan." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and swimming with tears. "Not this time. You don't understand." He took a shuddering breath and began to confess, the words tumbling out in a torrent of long-suppressed fear and shame. Years ago, when he was a junior associate, he had made a mistake, a terrible one. He'd missed a filing deadline in a major corporate lawsuit, a simple clerical error that had cost his client millions of dollars. It was the kind of mistake that ends a career before it even begins. He was terrified, ready to confess and accept the consequences. But then Marcus Thorne had appeared. At the time, Thorne was a consultant for the opposing firm. He'd discovered Ethan's mistake, but instead of exposing him, he'd offered a deal. He made the problem disappear, using his connections to bury the error so deeply no one would ever find it. In return, he kept the original damning evidence of Ethan's malpractice. It was the devil's bargain, and Ethan, young and terrified, had shaken his hand. "He's had it hanging over my head ever since." Ethan whispered, staring at nothing. A constant threat. He never asked for anything, not for years. I thought I was free. But then I met Sophia. Sophia knew Marcus. She was in deep with him, owing him a fortune she couldn't repay. And she knew about the skeleton in Ethan's closet. She was the one who came to him with the Charleston Horizons plan. It was her idea, but it was Marcus's muscle. They forced him to do it. They told him if he didn't use his legal expertise to make their fraudulent scheme look legitimate, that career-ending mistake from a decade ago would suddenly find its way into the hands of the State Bar Association. "He would have ruined me, Mom," Ethan cried, tears now streaming down his face. "Everything I've built. It would have been gone. They backed me into a corner. I had to do it. I had to." I looked at my son, the successful lawyer in his glass tower, and saw a man in a cage built of one past mistake and a mountain of fear. My anger at his betrayal was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But it was now entangled with an aching, profound sorrow. He was my son, brilliant and accomplished, but also weak and compromised. He was a victim as much as he was a conspirator. The opulent office, once a symbol of his success, now felt suffocating, like the most luxurious prison cell in the world. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was the only one who held the key. Clara didn't set up a meeting at a police station or a sterile federal building. She knew better. She chose a small, unassuming coffee shop tucked away in a historic alley, the kind of place tourists never find. It smelled of roasted chicory and old wood, and its dark, quiet corners were perfect for conversations that needed to stay off the record. I arrived first, choosing a booth in the back. A few minutes later, Clara came in, followed by a man who did not fit the Charleston scenery. He was in his late 40s, with a no-nonsense haircut, a plain gray suit that didn't quite belong among the local seersucker and linen, and eyes that missed nothing. He had the weary, patient look of a man who had seen every lie the world had to offer. "Victoria, this is Special Agent Davis," Clara said, making the introductions. "He specializes in white-collar crime." Davis shook my hand. His grip was firm, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Hale, thank you for meeting me. Clara tells me you've run into some trouble." He was being polite, but I could read between the lines. To him, I was likely another wealthy widow being taken for a ride by a charming predator. A sad but common story. It was time to change the narrative. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I opened my portfolio on the table and laid everything out in order, just like I would have for a corporate board meeting. The recording of Sophia's call, the labyrinthine chart of shell companies Clara had uncovered, the map with the red line strangling our beach house. And finally, I told him about Ethan, about the blackmail, the fear, the coercion. I laid the whole rotten affair bare on the table between the sugar packets and the cream. Davis listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on me, his face unreadable. He picked up the printout of the corporate structure, his eyes scanning the layers of deceit with professional interest. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, steepling his fingers. "This is extensive," he said, his tone shifting from polite detachment to genuine engagement. "The shell companies, the blackmail angle, this is a much bigger fish than we thought. Marcus Thorne has been on our radar for a while, but he's slippery. We've never been able to make anything stick." He looked at the evidence again. "With this, we can move. We can get warrants, freeze the accounts, shut the whole thing down before the wedding." He was offering me the logical solution, the safe one, the one where the authorities step in and take over. But as he said the words, a different plan, one that had been crystallizing in my mind since Ethan's confession, came into sharp focus. Shutting it down now would catch the foot soldiers, maybe even Sophia. But the true architect, Marcus Thorne, would likely slip away into the shadows, leaving my son's reputation in ruins and my family name dragged through the mud. I wasn't interested in simply stopping them. I was interested in destroying them. "No," I said. Agent Davis raised an eyebrow. "No? If you move now, Thorne will bolt. He'll burn the evidence and disappear," I said, my voice steady. "You'll cut the head off the snake, but the body will still be twitching. Ethan will be exposed as a co-conspirator, and Thorne will get away clean. I won't let that happen." Clara looked at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. She knew what was coming. "What are you proposing, Mrs. Hale?" Davis asked, leaning forward, his professional curiosity piqued. This was the moment, the pivot from victim to player. I was no longer a pawn in their game. I was changing the board. "I'm proposing we let them hang themselves," I said. "Let the wedding happen. Let them gather all their potential investors in one room. Let them think they've won, that the final piece of their plan is falling into place." I looked him directly in the eye. "Let them think they've successfully conned the old freeloader out of her money. I will be the bait." The idea hung in the air, audacious and dangerous. Davis stared at me, his initial skepticism now replaced with a look of reassessment. He was no longer seeing a distraught mother. He was seeing a strategist. He was seeing an asset. "You want to walk into the lion's den, knowing the lions are waiting," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "I want to help you lock the cage door from the inside," I countered. "We let the entire transaction play out under your surveillance. We record everything. We catch them red-handed, with every investor in that room as a witness. We don't just get Thorne for fraud. We get him for conspiracy, racketeering, the whole 9 yards. And in the process, we secure a deal for Ethan as a cooperating witness." It was no longer a plea for help. It was a negotiation. I was offering him the one thing he couldn't get on his own: a front-row seat to the crime of the century in Charleston society, gift-wrapped and delivered. Agent Davis was silent for a full minute, his mind clearly working, weighing the risks against the potential reward. Finally, a slow, grim smile touched his lips. "Mrs. Hale," he said, a newfound respect in his voice. "It seems Marcus Thorne picked a fight with the wrong family." The private client room at my bank was a space designed to soothe the nerves of the wealthy. It was all muted colors, plush carpeting, and discreet, silent service. A young woman brought in a tray with a silver pot of coffee and porcelain cups, then vanished without a word. The only thing out of place was the man sitting across the polished mahogany table from me. Agent Davis, looking as comfortable in this temple of finance as a wolf in a sheep pen. Another agent, a woman with a hawk-like focus, sat in the corner, a laptop open in front of her. She never spoke, but her eyes never stopped moving. "The account is live, Mrs. Hale," Davis said, his voice a low murmur. "It was opened last week at a bank in the Cayman Islands, then routed through 2 other offshore accounts before terminating in Delaware. Classic money laundering 101. As soon as your transfer hits, it will trigger silent alarms on every one of them. We'll have a complete digital map of where the money goes and who touches it." My own money, $100,000 of the inheritance Richard had worked his entire life to build, now being used as a tracer bullet, fired into the heart of their criminal enterprise. It felt like a violation, a sacrilege, but it was a necessary one. "Are you ready?" Davis asked, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. He wasn't just asking about the transaction. He was asking if I was ready to take this irrevocable step, to knowingly place the bait in the trap. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I logged into my private banking portal on the tablet the bank provided. My hands were steady, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my soul. I navigated to the wire transfer screen. The bank account number and routing information for Charleston Horizons LLC were already there, provided by Ethan days ago. It felt like he was guiding my hand to my own execution. I typed in the amount, $100,000, a number that was both immense and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It was the price of a wedding, the seed for a con, and now the cost of my son's freedom. My thumb hovered over the final confirmation button. This was it, the point of no return. I thought of Ethan's terrified face in his office, a man drowning in his own choices. I thought of the red line on the map, a scar across the landscape of my happiest memories. I took a deep breath and pressed down. The screen blinked. Transfer successful. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had done it. The trap was set. The female agent in the corner spoke for the first time, her voice crisp and professional. The transfer is confirmed. It just hit the Cayman account. They're moving it already. They're fast. Now for phase 2, Davis said, sliding a burner phone across the table. It was small, black, and untraceable. The call. They'll be expecting to hear from you. Sophia will have told Ethan to look for the confirmation. You need to sell this, Mrs. Hale. You need to sound like you've given up the fight. This was the part I dreaded most. Lying to my son. It felt more dishonest than the wire transfer, more treacherous than the entire sting operation. I was about to use his love for me as a weapon against him. I took the phone. The plastic felt cheap and foreign in my hand. Davis had already dialed the number. I pressed the call button and raised it to my ear. It rang twice before he picked up. Mom? Ethan's voice was tense, wary. I took a moment, letting out a long, shaky sigh I didn't have to fake. I pitched my voice to sound weary, defeated, the voice of a mother who had fought and lost. Ethan, I said, my voice raspy with unshed tears. It's done. I've transferred the money. There was a palpable silence on the other end of the line, then a soft exhale of breath. It was a sound of pure relief. It twisted like a knife in my gut. Mom, thank you, he stammered. You don't know what this means. This is the right thing for everyone. I don't know what it is anymore, Ethan, I replied, letting my voice crack. I'm tired of fighting. I just want my son to be happy. I just want this to be over. I let a sob catch in my throat. I hope this investment gives you the future you and Sophia want. That's all a mother can ask for. It will, Mom. I promise, he said, his voice now confident, reassuring. He was buying it, hook, line, and sinker. He truly believed he had won, that he had successfully managed his difficult old-fashioned mother. I'll see you at the wedding, dear, I whispered. Just be happy. I ended the call before he could hear the sob that finally broke free. I placed the burner phone back on the table and buried my face in my hands. The room was silent, except for the sound of my own quiet grief. I had played my part. I had lied to my son, convincingly and cruelly, and in doing so, I had just sealed his fate. And theirs. 15 minutes. That's how long I had until the curtain rose on the final act. From my seat at the head table, I had a perfect view of the entire ballroom. It was a sea of glittering gowns, starched tuxedos, and the soft glow of 1,000 candles. To the unsuspecting eye, it was a fairy tale. To me, it was a battlefield, and I was watching the enemy's final confident maneuvers before the ambush. I held a glass of champagne, but I didn't drink. The cool, slender stem was an anchor in the storm of my emotions. It was a prop, a symbol of the role I was playing. The serene, perhaps slightly melancholic, mother of the groom. Inside, my nerves were stretched as tight as piano wire. Every sense was heightened. I was no longer just a guest. I was a hunter, and the whole glittering room was my blind. My eyes found Sophia first. She was the picture of bridal perfection, laughing with a group of guests, tilting her head at just the right angle. But her performance was flawed. Every few seconds, her gaze would dart to the ornate clock on the ballroom wall, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. Then, she'd subtly check the delicate diamond watch on her wrist. A nervous tick she probably didn't even know she had. She was a woman running out of time, desperate for the grand finale to begin. Then, I saw Marcus Thorne. He was standing near the French doors that led out to the terrace, deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. The man was nondescript, easily forgettable, but he was carrying a sleek black leather briefcase. As I watched, Marcus clapped the man on the shoulder, a gesture of finality. The man nodded, handed the briefcase to Marcus, and then melted back into the crowd as if he'd never been there. Marcus held the case for a moment, his knuckles white. It was the prize, the collection plate from his flock of unsuspecting sheep. He was a wolf counting his chickens before they'd even hatched. Finally, my gaze fell on my son. Ethan was standing alone by the champagne fountain, a half-empty glass in his hand. He wasn't mingling. He wasn't smiling. He was staring into the cascading liquid with a vacant expression, like a man watching his own life drain away. He took another long swallow of champagne, his third in the last 10 minutes. He was trying to drown the guilt, to numb the fear. He looked lost, a ghost at his own wedding. A profound, aching sadness washed over me, but I pushed it down. There would be time for sorrow later. Tonight was for justice. I scanned the crowd, my heart beating a little faster. I was looking for a plain gray suit in a sea of black and white. And then I saw him. Agent Davis was standing near the bar, chatting with an elderly couple, looking for all the world like a distant cousin from out of town. He held a glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid. He wasn't looking at me, but he knew exactly where I was. As if he could feel my gaze, he glanced up, his eyes sweeping the room. For a fraction of a second, our gazes met across the crowded ballroom. There was no smile, no sign of recognition, just a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. All systems go. The team is in position. We are ready when you are. A strange calm settled over me. The pieces were all on the board. The queen was in her castle. The sharks were circling. The pawn was drowning his sorrows, and the cavalry was waiting just outside the gates. All that was left was the signal to charge. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of roses and betrayal filling my lungs. I placed the untouched champagne glass back on the table. The soft clink of crystal on linen sounded like a gavel falling in the silent courtroom of my mind. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. It was time to walk to the stage. The walk from my table to the stage was the longest 20 yards of my life. Each step was deliberate, measured. The rustle of my silk gown was the only sound I could hear over the frantic drumming of my own heart. The air, thick with the scent of flowers and expensive perfume, seemed to part before me. 300 pairs of eyes followed my progress, a ripple of curiosity turning into a wave of expectant silence. The band had finished their set, leaving a quiet void that I was about to fill with thunder. I reached the small, elevated stage and ascended the 2 steps. The polished wood felt solid beneath my heels. The microphone stood waiting in its stand, a silent scepter. I wrapped my hand around its cool metal body, lifted it free, and stepped to the center of the stage. The ballroom lights were warm on my face, but the glare didn't blind me. It sharpened my focus. I could see every detail with a crystalline, almost painful clarity. I was no longer a guest at a wedding. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, standing on a scaffold of my own design. My gaze swept across the room and found my targets. First, Sophia. She stood frozen beside the wedding cake, a champagne flute halfway to her lips. Her perfect smile had dissolved into a mask of confusion and dawning apprehension. The color was beginning to drain from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll on the verge of cracking. She knew, on some primal level, that the script had just been thrown into the fire. Next, Marcus Thorne. He had been making his way toward the exit, briefcase in hand, a man ready to cash out and disappear. He had stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly, and his eyes met mine. There was no confusion in his gaze, only a sudden, chilling flash of recognition, followed by a wave of pure, murderous rage. He understood immediately that he had been outplayed, that the mouse had turned out to be a tiger. He looked like a cornered animal, ready to kill. Finally, I looked at my son. Ethan was still by the fountain, but he was no longer staring into its depths. He was staring at me, his mother, standing on a stage where she didn't belong, holding a microphone she had no reason to touch. His face was a canvas of utter bewilderment and a deep, gut-wrenching dread. He looked like a man waking from a long nightmare, only to find himself in a far worse reality. I drew a slow, steadying breath. This was for Richard's memory. This was for the home we built. This was for the son I was about to lose in order to save. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice, when it came, was not the voice of a grieving widow or a confused old woman. It was the voice of Victoria Hale, the strategist, the matriarch, the woman they had so fatally underestimated. It was calm, clear, and carried to every corner of the silent waiting room. Before the bride and groom make their speeches, I began, letting the words settle into the profound quiet. I have an important announcement to make. I paused. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket of tension that smothered every whisper, every breath. I could feel 300 heartbeats hanging on my next words. I looked directly at Sophia, then let my gaze slide to Marcus, and finally I settled on my son, Ethan. I held his terrified gaze for a beat, a silent apology for the public destruction I was about to unleash. Then I delivered the line, the one I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. The words were not shouted. They were spoken with a precise, surgical coldness. The Hale family's investment of $100,000 into this project. I let the phrase hang in the air, a death sentence awaiting its final word. I watched Sophia's hand tremble, champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. I saw Marcus take a half step forward, his body coiled like a snake ready to strike. Is officially canceled. The final 2 words landed with the force of a gunshot. A collective, audible gasp swept through the ballroom. It was a sound of pure shock. For a moment, no one moved. It was a perfect tableau of disbelief. Then, I saw it. Sophia's face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of the beautiful bride shattering into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, trapped girl beneath. Ethan staggered back a step, his hand flying to his mouth as if to stifle a cry, his eyes wide with the horror of total, absolute ruin. The carefully built house of cards hadn't just been touched. It had been obliterated by a hurricane. And I was the storm. For a heartbeat, the world remained frozen in that perfect tableau of shock. Then, all hell broke loose. Just as planned, a woman shrieked near the terrace doors. It was a high, theatrical sound, immediately followed by the crash of a champagne tower, sending a cascade of crystal and golden liquid across the marble floor. A man shouted. Another table was overturned, and suddenly a pocket of manufactured chaos erupted in the back of the room. It was Marcus's exit strategy, a classic misdirection, a smokescreen of panic designed to draw every eye while he slipped out the back. I saw him move. He didn't run. He was too disciplined for that. With the briefcase clutched in his hand, he began a swift, purposeful walk toward the confusion, his face a mask of cold fury. He was already calculating his next move, planning his escape. He was 3 steps from the door. He never made the 4th. The grand double doors of the ballroom didn't just open. They exploded inward. At the same time, the terrace doors and every service entrance were thrown wide. Men and women in dark blue tactical gear with the letters FBI emblazoned in stark white across their chests swarmed into the room from every conceivable angle. They moved with a silent, synchronized efficiency that was far more terrifying than the fake pandemonium. FBI, nobody move! The command, amplified by a bullhorn, cut through the air, instantly silencing the screams of the guests and the staged shouts of Marcus's accomplices. Hands where I can see them! The wedding guests froze, a mixture of terror and utter confusion on their faces. Marcus Thorne stopped dead in his tracks, his escape route now blocked by 2 agents built like brick walls. The jig was up. He looked from the agents to the stage, and his eyes locked with mine one last time. If looks could kill, I would have been struck down by lightning. He didn't struggle. He simply let the briefcase drop to the floor with a dull thud, a flicker of something like respect, or perhaps pure hatred, in his cold eyes before an agent slammed him against the wall. My gaze shifted to Sophia. She wasn't trying to run. She was simply standing amidst the wreckage of the champagne tower, her white dress stained, looking like a ghost haunting the scene of her own demise. She stared at the agents as they approached her, her mouth slightly agape, her mind clearly unable to process the speed of her downfall. An agent, a woman with a grimly professional face, took her by the arm. Sophia Dubois, you're under arrest. As the cold steel of the handcuffs snapped around her delicate wrists, Sophia's legs gave out. She didn't scream or cry. She simply collapsed, a marionette whose strings had been cut, sinking into a heap of ruined silk and shattered dreams. Through it all, I remained on the stage, the microphone still clutched in my hand. I was an island of stillness in a sea of controlled chaos. My face was a mask of stone, revealing nothing of the hurricane of emotions raging within me. I felt a grim, icy satisfaction at seeing Marcus and Sophia brought to justice, but it was a hollow victory because my eyes were searching for my son. I found him. He hadn't moved. He was still standing by the fountain, a statue amidst the swirling agents and terrified guests. He was staring at Sophia as she was led away, then at Marcus, his face a wasteland of disbelief. He looked like a man who had been in a car crash and was only just beginning to realize the extent of his injuries. Then Agent Davis emerged from the crowd. He walked directly to Ethan, his expression not triumphant, but deeply, profoundly weary. He stopped in front of my son. Ethan Hale, Davis said, his voice quiet but carrying in the suddenly hushed room. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and forgery. Ethan didn't protest. He didn't argue. He just slowly raised his wrists, an act of quiet, absolute surrender. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my son's life breaking in two. He looked up then, over the heads of the agents and the stunned guests, and his eyes found mine. In them, I saw no anger, no betrayal, only a bottomless, heartbreaking despair, and a flicker of something else. Understanding. He finally understood the choice I had made. I stood motionless on my gilded stage, a queen surveying her victory. I had won. I had protected our legacy. I had exposed the predators. But the price of that victory was standing right before me, being led away in handcuffs. The cost was my own son, and in that moment, it felt like I hadn't won at all. I had simply lost in a different way. A year can be an eternity, or it can be the blink of an eye. For me, it had been both. I sat on the wide, weathered porch of our beach house on Sullivan's Island, the one Richard and I had built with our own hands so many summers ago. The morning air was soft and clean, carrying the familiar scent of salt and sweetgrass. A gentle breeze rustled the Spanish moss hanging from the live oaks, making them sway like sleeping giants. Beside me, Clara held a steaming mug of coffee, her comfortable silence a testament to a friendship that needed no words. The sound of the waves was a constant, soothing rhythm, a gentle shushing that had washed away the sharp edges of the past 12 months. It was the sound of healing. Inside the house, a television was on, the volume low. A local news anchor was recapping the final verdict in what the media had dubbed the wedding of the century fraud. Marcus Thorne, the anchor was saying, her voice crisp and professional. The mastermind behind the sophisticated Charleston Horizons real estate scheme was sentenced yesterday to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His accomplice, Sophia Dubois, received a lesser sentence of 5 years for her cooperation with the prosecution. Thanks to the early intervention of the FBI and the Hale family, nearly 80% of the targeted investment funds were recovered. Clara reached for the remote, and the anchor's voice vanished, leaving only the sound of the sea. The war was officially over. The dragons had been slain. In my lap, my hands rested on a piece of paper. It was a letter, its creases softened from being unfolded and read 100 times. The paper was thin, almost translucent in places, and the ink was slightly blurred, as if it had been written through tears. It was from Ethan. He wasn't in a prison cell. His cooperation, his genuine remorse, and perhaps a bit of the lingering respect for the Hale family name had earned him a deal. He'd served 6 months in a minimum security facility and was now completing 2 years of mandatory community service. He had lost his license to practice corporate law, a punishment he had accepted with a quiet dignity I hadn't seen in him for years. I smoothed the letter out, my eyes tracing the familiar lines of his handwriting. "Mom," it began, "the sun is rising over the city, but it's different here. I see it through the window of the legal aid clinic before the first clients arrive. These people, they come in with the weight of the world on their shoulders, fighting evictions, trying to get disability, just looking for a fair shake. I can't take their cases to court, but I can do the research. I can draft the documents. I can listen. It's the first time in a decade that my work has felt clean." I spend a lot of time thinking about that day, about everything that led up to it. For so long, I told myself I was a victim, that I was trapped, but that was a lie I used to help me sleep at night. The truth is, I made a choice a long time ago, the moment I decided to hide my mistake instead of facing it. I chose the easy way out, and it led me down a road that got darker with every step. I'm learning to forgive myself. It's slow work. Some days are harder than others. But the one thing that keeps me going is knowing that you haven't given up on me. I paused, my finger resting on the last, most important paragraph, the words that had both broken my heart and healed it at the same time. "Sophia called you a freeloader." I stood there and let her say it. It's the greatest shame of my life. Because the truth, Mom, is that I was the one freeloading all along. I was freeloading off your integrity, off the good name you and Dad built, off a lifetime of your unconditional love. I took it all for granted. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I folded the letter carefully and looked out at the horizon, where the sun was now a brilliant, blazing orange, painting the underside of the clouds in shades of rose and gold. A new day was beginning. The victory hadn't brought parades or celebration. It had brought this, a quiet, profound peace. A peace born of survival, of truth reclaimed. I had lost so much. The illusion of a perfect son, the innocence of our family's name. But in the ashes, I had found something far more valuable. I had found my son again, not the one I thought he was, but the man he was becoming. I had protected our home, our legacy. Sophia had called me a freeloader, an old woman living off the past. She was wrong. I wasn't a freeloader. I was a protector, and my watch was finally over. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.